Joining us now is Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. He joins us from Philadelphia. Jonathan, thanks so much. It's been a year-long conflict. It's recently spread beyond Gaza into Lebanon. I'm curious, what are your reflections today?
Well, it's kind of an overwhelming date. As I wrote myself, it adds one more somber date of mourning to a Jewish calendar that was already replete with many somber dates commemorating tragedies in the history of the Jewish people. But it's fresh in our memories, not just because it was only a year ago, but because the conflict continues today. As you say, Israel is still fighting Hamas, seeking to eradicate the perpetrators of October 7th, and to prevent Hezbollah, their allies and their Iranian paymasters, from creating other fronts against Israel, where they have essentially depopulated a portion of northern Israel. But we're also here in the United States primarily reflecting on a year in which we saw a surge, an unprecedented surge in anti-Semitism that is unlike anything that is within the living memory of anybody other than the few remaining Holocaust survivors. And let me take issue with one phrase that you used in your opening to this discussion when you spoke of pro-Palestinian rallies. The rallies that took place on Wall Street and in many other cities around the world, as well as in the United States and on college campuses, were not really pro-Palestinian. They were pro-Hamas. They were pro-terror. They were in favor of the goals of the terrorists, which is to eradicate the Jewish state, the one Jewish state on the planet, supporting their terrorism, much like Holocaust deniers, minimizing and justifying at the same time, even as they glorify these events as resistance. Yeah. Anybody who's truly pro-Palestinian would be telling the Palestinians to put away the delusions offered them by Hamas and most of the other Palestinian parties, and to make peace with Israel, to put away their delusion that they can somehow roll back the clock to 1947 or 1917 and erase the Jewish state, eradicate it. That's never going to happen. And as long as they believe, as indeed even Sinwar, the commander of the remaining few Hamas terrorists inside Gaza, deep inside a tunnel where he's surrounded by hostages to ensure what he hopes will ensure his safety, he still thinks that the West will bail him out. Not just the protesters, but he thinks Western governments will do so. And as long as they think that, this war will continue.
How stretched are the Israel Defense Forces at the moment? Because you're really talking about three fronts. There's Gaza, there's also Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then to a certain degree the Houthis as well in Yemen.
The Israelis say seven fronts. But,
okay, seven.
Three, we can say three. That's fine.
The point of the question, I understand, because the Middle East is a large place. But how stretched are they now? How much do they need the United States, and how much are they willing to actually ignore requests from the United States for restraint?
Well, the U.S. alliance is very important to Israel, but it is not more important than its survival. And it's not going to listen to advice to accept ceasefires that will allow Hamas to survive, that will allow Hezbollah to continue to depopulate portions of northern Israel, and allow existential threats to continue. Its forces are stretched, sure. Its army, it's a little country. It's less than 10 million people. Even fully mobilized, the army, isn't all that big, as effective as it is. But the point is, it's effective enough to continue to the job of mopping up Hamas and of doing grave damage to Hezbollah in Lebanon, far more than anybody thought that they could do, far more than the Iranians thought that they can do, because the Iranians see Hezbollah's missiles and armed forces as not so much, another terrorist force. It's part of their fail-safe. It's part of their defense system, which they hope to unleash against Israel if anybody attacks their nuclear facilities. So they're not in bad position. They have learned some of the lessons, and they are determined to push their enemies to concede or stand down. And I think that's, and in doing so, I would add, they're fighting enemies of the West and enemies of the United States. And they deserve our support, not the backbiting and not the attempts to sort of bring them up short or boycotts or, as France is declaring, that they won't sell arms. That's a betrayal. They're doing the right thing in defending themselves and in seeking to destroy their enemies, as any rational nation would do, put in the same position. The United States, remember, after 9/11, we went halfway around the world to take out the Taliban for hosting al-Qaeda. Israel's enemies are next door.
Jonathan,
they can't afford to let that situation continue where their enemies can threaten their existence.
Very quickly, I know you're in Philadelphia, but best you can you take us inside Israel right now and describe a little bit about the political dynamic that's happening within the country and the conversation going on currently? Well,
the main dynamic over the last year has been one of pain. I've been to Israel during this year. I've seen it. I've interviewed people. But it's also a country that, I think people don't necessarily understand if they just see it on TV and just see the suffering, just see the bad stuff. That's very resilient. It has an army full of people, even reservists in the 20s, 30s, even 40s, and you interview them coming out of Gaza, and their morale is very high, as much as it's a very difficult battle, because they believe that they are fighting for their homes and families and against, an enemy that seeks to destroy them, and they're right to think that. The political dynamic is complicated, but not quite exactly the way it's often portrayed in the American media. Netanyahu is deeply controversial. He's been around forever, which is, always a recipe for, unpopularity of some sort, and justifiably so, because nobody should rule forever in a democracy. But Netanyahu holds on to the support of a large percentage of the Israelis, and he's doing better now in the polls. In fact, one poll that was just recently conducted showed him winning the next election, which is not what people expected.
It does bring up an interesting point on U.S. relations, because Kamala Harris, when she was interviewed on 60 Minutes, she drew a distinction between backing the Israeli government and the Israeli people. Was that wrong on her part, or was that correct?
Well, it's a reflection of American politics, not the realities of Israeli politics, which are complex enough. Her base, the Democratic base, the left wing of the Democratic Party, is deeply hostile to Israel. We saw that throughout the campaign. And so she has to sort of split the difference. She has to signal moderate and centrist Democrats that she's still pro-Israel, because the overwhelming majority of Americans still support Israel, while still also signaling her left-wing supporters that she's not really against them either, those who really hate Israel. That was shown when when Netanyahu addressed Congress, and she wouldn't, she boycotted the session so she wouldn't have a picture taken sitting above him while he was speaking, and then had a meeting, but in private, and made clear it was kind of hostile. So this is about the dance that she has to make and sort of thread the needle for, maintaining Democratic support and centrist support if she's going to win this election. It has nothing to do with the actual alliance or what will happen next year.
Jonathan, we'll leave it there. Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, joining us here on Daybreak Asia. We'll take a look at markets in a moment. This is